Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 The situation at the Mayon volcano in the Philippines, which has produced more distinct eruptions than any other volcano in the country since 1900, has rapidly escalated. A sudden summit inflationary trend due to the movement of magma was detected on May 4th of 2023, and beginning on June 4th, the number of rockfalls at the volcano which were triggered by the intrusion of new material that caused the pre-existing cooled lava dome to become too steep and partially collapse dramatically increased. This caused Mayon's alert level to be raised from 1 to 2 on the 0 to 5 alert level scale at 10 a.m. local time on June 5th. Yet, only 2 days later, 4 larger-scale rockfalls occurred, causing fresh volcanic gas to be released from the volcano, generating pyroclastic flows which traveled up to a distance of 2 kilometers. This seemingly marks the exact time Mayon officially began a new volcanic eruption, as soon after, on noon of June 8th, its alert level was raised from 2 to 3 for the first time since December 18th of 2014. Numerous reports followed as fresh lava and a distinct orange glow became visible on Mayon's summit. This material then occasionally tumbled downslope, creating lava avalanches. Another pyroclastic flow was subsequently generated, which I geolocated using photo evidence to suggest that it traveled 2.8 kilometers or 1.74 miles. As a result, as of the writing of this video, a 6-kilometer exclusion zone is in place in all directions around Mayon's summit, and there are possible indications that this could be further expanded to 7 kilometers or even an 8-kilometer radius in the near future. If these exclusion zones were to be expanded, although unusually long lava flows, rockfalls, or volcanic gas could play a factor, the primary driver of an increased radius would be the threat of long-reaching pyroclastic flows. Although Mayon's mostly effusive, albeit slightly explosive ongoing eruption, as there are some minor ash emissions, might seem to be fairly close in activity to its 2014 eruption rather than its more explosive 2018 eruption, this nature could change rather abruptly. Remember, although sulfur dioxide emissions had been elevated in comparison to prior days, we did not think that the gas emissions were high enough to indicate the movement of shallow magma, and yet lava erupted anyways. There is a chance that if a thick enough cap builds on Mayon's summit via a slowly expanding lava dome, that it could plug the magma conduit supplying molten rock to the surface. This could cause gas to build in pressure, eventually reach a critical point, and explode upwards and outwards in a volcanic eruption. As some of this material would be too dense to travel upwards, it would fall back to the ground as a pyroclastic flow, traveling primarily but not always down regions defined by ravines, riverbeds, and other low points. These can travel fairly long distances and are the primary killer in Mayon's historical eruptions, with one 1968 pyroclastic flow traveling 7.5 kilometers or 4.66 miles away from Mayon's summit. Although current evidence suggests that the ongoing eruption for now will be more similar to 2014 than 2018, we simply do not know for sure what will happen next. Based on the amount of ash that has been emitted, I would still probably place Mayon's eruption so far on the 0 to 9 volcanic explosivity index as a 0, with it possibly already being a 1.
What they're talking about is not their proof, but it comes from Norway. The Norwegian seismic organisation called NORSAR, they have a monitoring station in Romania, which is 400 miles away from the Nova Kakhovka Dam. And they say that they picked up, at exactly the time explosions were heard, they picked up a seismic disturbance 400 miles away, which could only have come from huge explosions. They pinned it down to exactly where the dam was. They've pinned down the size of the explosions. You can see on the graph that they've published. And this has come from Norway. Now, this convinces the Ukrainians and the rest of us that a major series of explosions took place then, because you can only breach a dam like that with big explosions, literally tons of explosives, placed at the very base of the dam. That's almost certainly is what happened, and the Ukrainians would never be in a position to do that. They didn't own that part of the dam. The Russians were in control of it. So, and we knew that they'd mined it last October. We were waiting for them to do this, and I'm 99% certain it was them.
And, of course, the reason that they would try and blow up that dam if it was the Russians?
Well, because it then made it very difficult for the Ukrainians to attack across the Dnieper River. It creates another humanitarian problem for Ukraine, distracts them while they're trying to conduct this counteroffensive, and there's a degree of revenge in it as well. I think if you're going to attack us, well, we'll blow the dam up. I mean, they've been thinking about it for a long time, we're sure about that, and now they've done it.
So the Ukrainians feel they have proof that it was the Russians who blew up the dam.
And we begin with breaking news this hour about the Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine. It was breached, leading to mass flooding and evacuations. Well, now scientists from Norway say that seismic signals detected in Romania suggest there was an explosion in the area at the same time that water began flowing downstream. Questions have been asked as to whether the explosion caused the breach or whether previous damage had simply weakened the structure. Well, let's go straight to our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams, who is in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And Paul, it is hard to know the exact details, but we're starting to get more evidence now, aren't we, about what could have caused this catastrophic failure of the dam?
Yes, I think the one thing we can say with some confidence now is that it was clearly an event which occurred at 2:54 in the early hours of Tuesday morning. The seismic readings that were detected around 400 miles away in Romania indicate that this was a very, very large explosion. They describe it as between 1 or 2 magnitude. They're still working on the data. They haven't translated that magnitude into a kind of calculation as to how much explosives that would require. That is quite technical work. But it is clear that that explosion, which they identify within a less than 20-mile radius of the dam at Nova Kakhovka, was a very, very large explosion. We're probably talking about tons of explosives. So I think that, to my way of thinking, that establishes that what caused this breach, because that is exactly the time when local reports started talking about this catastrophic breach. We now know that it was the result of a major explosion. Now, of course, does that tell you who did it? No. But the dam and the adjacent hydroelectric plant were controlled by Russia. The explosion, we believe, or the breach, we believe, came from the end of the dam adjacent to the hydroelectric station. The Ukrainians had been arguing since last April that the Russians had mined the dam. And this morning, Ukraine's internal domestic security service released what they say, we cannot verify this, but they say is a recording of two Russian military figures discussing the demolition of the dam by a Russian sabotage group. They say that the two men, at least one of the men, observes that it was designed to frighten the Ukrainians, not necessarily to destroy the dam completely. It's worth remembering that this is on a front line, and that at various areas along that front line, the Ukrainians had shown some interest in trying to cross the river Dnipro. And so from a purely military point of view, there may have been some incentive for Russia to warn off Ukraine about any any prospect of a river crossing. So if you like, it's an accumulation of evidence that really does point the finger very strongly in the direction of Russia being responsible.
And Paul, while all of those questions seek answers, there is a humanitarian crisis that is unfolding too. We were just looking at images of drones trying to drop water to people who are still trapped in those floodwaters. What can you tell us about rescue efforts there, particularly because there are reports those efforts to get people out have been hindered themselves by artillery fire on the people that were trying to evacuate?
Well, again, remember, this is a city, Kherson, that is also on that front line, albeit now a rather broad front line due to the enormous flooding down the river. Kherson has been shelled ever since the Ukrainians took it back in November. So in one sense, what we're seeing and what we've seen throughout the week is not particularly different from what we had seen before the dam burst. But certainly rescue workers in Kherson who are still plucking people from waterlogged homes report that they believe that they are coming under fire. Some of that fire is exchanges of gunfire with artillery being fired in both directions, but they do sense that at times they have been targeted. You mentioned getting water to people. That is probably top of the list of things that the Ukrainian authorities are wrestling with now, because the dam and the reservoir behind it was at the heart of Ukraine's water supply system in the whole of that area of southern Ukraine. So in terms of agriculture, but also in terms of the provision of clean water to hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of Ukrainian civilians in towns and cities, not even adjacent to the river, but quite some distance from it. All of that has been jeopardized and thrown into question by the events of Tuesday morning. So water is the number one preoccupation, particularly as it's hot. Kherson is still flooded with filthy, polluted water, and there's a real danger of disease.
Paul, for now, thank you. It's good to talk to you. Paul Adams there, our correspondent live in
Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. As you've already heard, the according to some Russian and Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians launched their greatest counter-offensive operation. Of course, some sources are calling this just a small recco in combat or something like this. Other sources are saying that was and this is a real Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. Of course, it's up to you how to call this operation, and that clashes that took place on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead in Ugledar, Avdiivka, and so on. But if you ask my opinion, I'll tell you that was the first phase of the greatest Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, and during this video I'll try to explain to you why I think so. And first of all, the main clashes in the main part took place in the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. This is the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. There are a lot of settlements, and as you can see, this is a small salient in this area, and all this salient is encircled by the Ukrainian forces, and today the Ukrainians were trying to attack this area from different directions. The Russian sources are saying that the Ukrainians used at least 2 mechanized regiments in that area to attack the Russian forces. Based on the video and photo confirmation that we have from the open source, I assume that there were not 2 mechanized regiments but 3 mechanized regiments. And if when talking about a regiment, we need to understand that there is around 200 soldiers and something around from 10 to 20 armored vehicles, including tanks and light vehicles and so on. So probably today the Ukrainians were using the forces of around 600 soldiers and around 60 armored vehicles, including tank in that operation. And the direction of the Ukrainians' attack was, the first direction was from Novopol in direction of Novodarivka. This was the first direction of Ukrainian attack. Let's add an arrow for these purposes for better understanding of the situation. So that was the first direction of Ukrainian attack. The second direction of Ukrainian attack was from Novoselka in direction of Rivnopol, this settlement. Let's add another arrow for these purposes. And the third attack was from Vremivka, this small settlement, and this is the entire bridgehead is called based on the name of this small settlement, Vremivka tactical bridgehead. And from this area the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians in direction of New Skuchne. So those were 3 attacks. Now let's move the mechanized parts to the south. Another one, let's move to this area, and the second one in direction of New Skuchne. So there were 3 attacks, and when talking about the first phase of the first wave, the Russians reported that as a result of that attack on minefields and under attack of artillery and aviation fire, the Ukrainians lost 5 tanks and something around 15 armored vehicles. So just to bypass the territory from north